welcome back to the Fruity Podcast. I'm Alicia, and I'm here today with Sophia, Emma, and Natalie. Today we're going to be talking about the GMO Arctic apple. Start out the conversation today and give a general background on GMOs in the world that we're living in today. So it's really important in agriculture that we have enough food to feed all the people in the world, and it's estimated for the population to grow up to 9 billion really soon.
Really?
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? I don't know how we're going to fit that many people in the world.
Yeah, that's really crazy.
And there's a really bright future ahead, luckily, for the advancements in GMO technology. And more research, there will be a great method of increasing crop yields, which will be so helpful to getting more food to people around us, as we know that hunger is already an issue in the world today. Right. Today, we're going to specifically talk about the GMO Arctic apple, why it was created, and how the process itself works. So apples have this PPO enzyme in them that causes them to brown when it's injured, dropped, or just even cut into. Oftentimes, this causes people not to want to eat the rest of the apple or even buy it in the first place. This is a really big issue when it comes to food waste, as so many apples are wasted every year just because of the way that they look. The Arctic apple is created in order to get rid of the browning enzyme. Not really get rid of, but more turn it off. Yeah, turn off the enzyme in order to stop the browning from occurring. This will be very, very good to reduce food waste, as people won't be inclined to throw it away as soon as the apple turns brown. When it comes to this enzyme, I understand that they're kind of silencing it, but what does that necessarily mean?
So that's actually a really good question. I was reading an article on NPR the other day, and this GMO is unlike any other before, where it's a cisgenic GMO, unlike most agricultural GMOs are transgenic, where they take DNA from other plants and then they transplant that DNA into the plant. But this one works entirely within its own genome. So the enzyme that, the PPO enzyme, they're just entering in some RNA to interfere with the production of it, because there's apparently only 4 genes that deal with the production of this enzyme. Like, we mapped out the entirety of the apple's genome back in, 2000, which is insane.
Okay, so they're not necessarily, removing genes and putting in different genes. They're just changing the enzyme.
Exactly. They're just working within the apple itself and, just shutting it off.
That's amazing.
Exactly. It's not like anything we've ever seen before, and especially because they're kind of putting this towards consumers rather than farmers. This is one of the first ones that we've seen that's really been pushed towards consumers. I mean, we've seen the golden rice, was it?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that was for consumers, but it didn't really go very well. And this one is still in the process of going through that. So we're still testing it out, and hopefully it goes somewhere. But the PPO itself, when you cut open an apple, it mixes with, I'm not going to pronounce this right, but it's polyphenolics, which is already in the cell. So when that happens, a kind of melanin gets left behind in the apple, and that's what causes browning, and that is what kind of turns people off, away from the apple.
Yeah, so I actually did read an article about the PPOs as well, and it said that 90 to 91% of reduction in PPOs are in this apple.
Wow.
So there's 90 to 91% less, which is pretty interesting. And, the public narrative, too, that you're talking about, how it's being marketed towards more consumers than farmers, is a tricky thing, because it's hard to convince the public what they should think. And another article I read said that once a consumer is told that there are GMOs in their food, they are less likely to buy it. They're more likely to rethink it because it's abnormal.
Really?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are afraid of GMOs nowadays.
And
it's
I
kind of
think
interesting.
it's just because they don't have the information to know, these GMOs aren't necessarily hurting me.
Right.
And especially for the Arctic apples, people think the fact that it doesn't bruise is a little off-putting, a little weird. They're not familiar with it.
Yeah, and the one article I was reading, they actually mentioned that a lot of people think that means the food has gone bad, but they just aren't shown that. But browning doesn't mean that the food's gone bad.
No.
Right. And there's normal, but there's different ways to do that to prevent it from bruising, like the lemon juice,
Yeah.
just adding those different enzymes in there. But the FDA and USDA actually did approve this apple already,
Right.
and they said that it's non-toxic, non-allergenic. Main concern here is, like the trans genes, the MPTII. But what are the actual, like, pros and cons of this? Did anyone look into that?
Yeah, so I looked at that. I actually looked at an article from the Chemical and Engineering News Journal, and I heard a lot about the risks and benefits from that. Okay, so starting with the risks, obviously, as we mentioned earlier, there is a lot of controversy surrounding GMOs. And part of the reason for that is that people are really concerned that the existing regulations for them are actually not that great and don't really give the consumers a good idea if things are actually safe. Like, there's things that could be skipped over in that regulation process. So that's one thing. And the other thing with the Arctic apple that some people are concerned with is cross-pollination, and that's a concern for a bunch of GMOs. But you don't want the apples to then contaminate, any other plants that are around them through, pollen contamination.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is, some argue that with the Arctic apple, you're going to need to put different labels and stuff on it in the store to differentiate it. And some people think that the labeling and the marketing and all that would be required isn't really worth the benefit of just eliminating the browning.
I just feel like it wouldn't be that hard to change labeling on things, I mean,
Right.
they do it all the time with other products.
But I think a lot of it, too, is the marketing. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention, too, is that, the packaging that they've been talking about using in stores for these is actually pretty wasteful because they want to cut the apples, like, in slices in plastic, and that way it shows the consumers that it's not browning, that sort of thing.
Right.
But in reality, it's creating all of this waste that's really unnecessary.
Yeah.
So I think it would just be better to use, like, a different label or something and then just package it the normal way that
just
you
Right,
would.
sell
yeah.
the apple.
Really,
Like,
it's not that hard. So those are some of the risks or problems with this. But there's also obviously the benefit that we've already talked about. There's no browning. The apple can be dropped or cut or whatever, and it's not going to brown. And with a lot of foods, people see something at the grocery store that looks deformed, or people have an apple and it browns, and then they don't want to eat it because it doesn't look visually appetizing.
I mean, I don't eat apples because they're browning.
Yeah,
I
think
the
I'm guilty
mush
of it.
is so gross. I
Yeah,
hate the texture.
It's a really bad texture. And so, because of that, people are like, okay, well, I'm not eating this. And then there's all this waste, and that's, really unnecessary. So the ideal of this, I think, is that it would kind of get rid of that and reduce that amount of waste a little bit.
Right.
And maybe, there's other fruits that could be modified in this way so that they don't brown or change color in an unappetizing way
like
either.
bananas.
Yeah, bananas. That's a good example. And, because this is kind of a simple change, it could make GMOs more acceptable if people start, readily buying them, which is good because there's a lot of controversy surrounding GMOs, as I obviously mentioned. So, yeah, the technology could definitely be applied to other plants. Anyway, though, so what are your guys' thoughts on the Arctic apple? Like, if it was in a store, would you buy it?
If it was just the apple, I would 100% buy it. But since they're literally putting cut up apples in like this plastic container, which is so unnecessary, like, no, I'm not gonna buy it.
Yeah, we already have enough problems with waste.
Right, they're trying to reduce food waste, but what about plastic waste?
It's counterintuitive.
Yeah.
It's so backwards.
I totally
Plastic
agree.
bad, but I would take a bite out of the apple.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, because it's like, also, I don't like my fruit being pre-cut up when it's supposed to be in the protective layer that it's grown with. 'Cause
Right.
that just feels like it's
Yeah.
being, like, exposed to other things there. Like, I know that the browning thing is supposed to, like, stop it from the air particles turning it brown.
Right.
But the idea of it just sitting out like
and
that
also,
makes me a little uncomfortable.
I don't know what knife is cutting it. What has that knife touched?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess
don't
so.
know.
I think that's all we have to talk about today about the GMO apples and whether or not they're okay in our minds and just everything about it that we can think of. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you had a good time.